Welcome, everyone, to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a topic that honestly affects every single one of us every time we swipe a debit card or hit the grocery store. We hear the word inflation thrown around constantly on the news. And sure, sometimes it sounds like this intimidating, heavy financial jargon, but at its core, it's really just a mechanism that directly impacts your wallet, your savings, and your daily life. So today, we're completely stripping away all that complex terminology to give you a really clear, objective look at how this economic force actually works. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll cover the definition of inflation, what causes prices to rise, how we actually measure your cost of living, the real impact on daily life, and finally, why stability matters most. It's a nice, logical journey from the macro to the micro, starting broad and bringing it right back home to your household. Okay, section 1, the definition of inflation. Let's dive right into this and establish a really clear, shared baseline so we're all on the exact same page. At its most basic level, inflation is simply the general increase in the prices of goods and services over time. But here's the absolute critical part to remember. We're not just talking about an isolated price hike on one specific item, like, say, your favorite brand of cereal suddenly getting more expensive. We're talking about a broad, general increase across the entire economy. And the true bottom line result of this is a decline in the purchasing power of your money. Basically, every dollar you hold just buys fewer goods and services than it did before. To make that super tangible, let's look at a routine trip to the store. Let's say we have a standard inflation rate of 3% in a given year. That means a basket of groceries that costs you $100 today is going to cost you $103 exactly 1 year from now. You're getting the exact same amount of food, right? But it requires more of your hard-earned money to actually get it. It's this subtle, almost invisible erosion of your cash's value over time. Moving on to section 2, what causes prices to rise? Now that we know our money is buying less, it really begs the question, right? What is actually driving these price changes behind the scenes? Well, there are two major economic forces at play here. First up, we've got demand pull inflation. You usually see this during periods of really strong economic growth. Consumers and businesses have money, employment is up, and everyone is out there spending. But if the supply of goods can't quite keep up with that massive demand, prices get pulled upward. It's literally a case of too much money chasing too few goods. Then, on the flip side, we have cost push inflation. This happens when the actual cost of producing goods goes up. Maybe raw materials get super expensive or wages rise. Businesses can't just absorb those losses forever, right? So they push those higher costs right onto us, the consumers, in the form of higher prices. And this brilliantly illustrates how cost push inflation ripples through the economy, almost like dominoes. Think about it. Energy is a huge input in basically all economic activity. So step 1, global oil prices go up. Almost instantly in step 2, the cost to fuel the delivery trucks and cargo ships shoots up too. So by the time we hit step 3, when that apple finally arrives at your local grocery store, the store owner literally has to raise the price of that apple just to cover the extra shipping expense. Now, beyond just demand and production costs, there are a few other major drivers to keep in mind. For instance, if central banks significantly increase the broader money supply without a matching increase in the actual production of goods, well, prices go up. Then you've got supply chain disruptions. Think natural disasters knocking out major factories. And honestly, this is wild, but our own psychology plays a huge role too. If we all kind of expect prices to be higher next year, workers will naturally demand higher wages right now to prepare, which in turn forces businesses to raise prices to pay those wages. It's a completely self-fulfilling prophecy. Which brings us to section 3, measuring your cost of living. So we know why prices go up, but how do governments and economists actually track these changes out in the real world? Well, they use something called the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI for short. Basically, government agencies conduct these massive surveys to create a theoretical basket of goods and services that your average household buys. Then they just track the cost of that exact basket over time. And this basket is very much grounded in everyday reality. It includes things like food, fuel, and everyday services, even haircuts. Notably, in places like the US, housing expenses, which includes rent and mortgages, take up the absolute largest slice of this measurement pie. Now, what's really interesting about this is the difference between headline and core inflation. Headline inflation is that big, flashy number you usually see on the evening news. It includes absolutely everything in the basket. But policymakers, like the Federal Reserve, they actually prefer to look at core inflation. Core inflation intentionally strips out food and energy prices. You might be wondering, why do that? Well, it's because food and energy are incredibly volatile. A sudden freeze could send orange juice prices sky high, or a geopolitical event could spike oil. By removing those erratic, noisy swings, economists can spot the true, persistent, long-term trends in the economy. All right, Section 4, the impact on daily life. Let's bring this whole explainer right down to the micro level now. How do these massive macroeconomic forces actually hit your personal wallet? Honestly, the single most important factor for your household is how inflation compares to your paycheck. Your real income is basically a proxy for your standard of living. If your wages increase at the exact same 3% rate as inflation, your purchasing power is totally stable. You're completely fine. But if prices are rising faster than your income, that's when you face the single biggest cost of an inflationary environment, the rapid erosion of your real income. You'll effectively become poorer, even if your paycheck looks exactly the same as it did last year, simply because that check buys you less. These uneven price changes also create some pretty clear winners and losers. For example, take someone who locked in a fixed-rate mortgage. If inflation is running high, the actual real value of the debt they owe is dropping. Their debt literally becomes easier to pay off. They benefit. But contrast that with a pensioner who's living on a strict fixed retirement income. As the cost of their daily necessities goes up, their fixed income doesn't budge an inch. So unfortunately, their standard of living suffers tremendously. So here is a really crucial takeaway. Inflation is essentially a silent penalty on stagnant money. If the inflation rate is running at, say, 4%, but your cash savings are just sitting in an account not growing at all, the real purchasing value of your life savings is quietly shrinking every single day. This is exactly why understanding inflation is absolutely vital for your long-term financial planning. Moving into our final part, Section 5, Why Stability Matters Most. With all these moving parts we've talked about, why do central banks treat extreme price changes with such absolute urgency? Well, just look at the staggering number, 500 billion%. Nope, that's not a typo. In 2008, the country of Zimbabwe experienced one of the absolute worst cases of hyperinflation in recorded history, peaking at an estimated annual rate of 500 billion%. It was a total severe economic breakdown. It destroyed wealth so completely that the country eventually had to just abandon its own national currency. High inflation utterly destroys trust and stability. But here's the thing, the opposite extreme is also terrible. Deflation, which means falling prices, probably sounds pretty great at first, right? I mean, who doesn't want cheaper stuff? But historically, as we've seen in places like Japan, it is highly dangerous. Think about it. If you know a car or a house is going to be significantly cheaper next month, you're going to delay your purchase. And if everyone delays their purchases, economic activity grinds to a halt. Producers generate less income, and economic growth just stall out entirely. This is exactly why major central banks, like the U.S. Federal Reserve, typically target a very specific low number, an annual inflation rate of 2%. They absolutely want to avoid the destructive force of hyperinflation, but they also desperately want to avoid the freezing effect of deflation. A low, moderate 2% rate hits a sweet spot. It maintains a healthy, predictable balance. It gently encourages people to go ahead and spend or invest now rather than hoarding cash, and that keeps the whole economy moving forward. As the Federal Reserve itself notes, when households and businesses can reasonably expect inflation to remain low and stable, they are able to make sound decisions regarding saving, borrowing, and investment. And that right there is the key, predictability. Predictability is the ultimate goal. It reduces distortion and allows everyday people to just live their lives, sign contracts, and plan their household budgets without constantly panicking about the future value of their money. Which leaves us with this final thought for the day. We've seen how inflation pulls the strings behind the scenes of our entire economy. So, if low, predictable inflation continues to be the target reality, how will your household budget adapt over the next 5 years to ensure your purchasing power remains strong? I want to thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. I really hope it brought some vital clarity to how these massive numbers shape our daily lives. Keep a close eye on your purchasing power, and as always, keep asking great questions.